Tim likes to joke that I have a fetish for Australian subjects. It's a fair cop. I grew up in Australia, so anything that the Australian Air Force, Army, or Navy used, I kind of want to build. So when I came across this Czech Master Kit's F4A1 Recon Lightning conversion set for the 1/48 scale Tamiya P-38F Lightning kit, I was in there like Flynn. I mean, it seemed like an easy conversion. Chop off the nose, put the new one on. What could possibly go wrong? Examining the conversion set instructions, I decided to start by removing the kit parts that will be replaced. The upper fuselage half was easy because the cut lines are hard edged where the separate nose fits, so I simply sawed through the thin plastic. The cuts on the lower half follow recessed panel lines, but I placed tape along the lines to guide the cutters. I started the cuts by dragging a scriber along the panel lines to deepen them. A razor saw finished the work. To check everything so far, I held the modified halves together and placed the resin part against the edge. With the fit looking decent, it was time to remove the pour plugs from the resin parts. Using a pull saw, I cut through the joint, sticking close to the part, but avoiding cutting into it. A coarse sanding stick refined the edge. The same process followed for the tip of the nose. Good news! Test fittings showed the parts matched pretty well. The camera port openings are skinned over with thin resin that was easily removed by running the tip of a blade along the edges. I cleaned up the edges with a metal sanding stick. The hard core keeps the edges straight and the corners clean. The lower edge of the resin part will interfere with the fit of the nose gear bay, so I thinned that lower inner edge of the part with a hobby knife and sanding sticks. The camera parts are molded in clear resin. I painted the inside of the round part black and the inside of the rest the interior color. A sanding stick holds the tiny pour plug in place as I separated the part from it. Testing showed a snug fit, and I secured the ports with generous applications of microscale micro crystal clear brushed on inside. These two pins at the front of the gear bay need to go to fit the resin parts. After gluing the fuselage together, including the completed cockpit, I checked the fit of the resin parts. Lining it up along the long diagonal joins revealed small gaps and a step at the lower front joins. I attached the resin parts with two-part epoxy. The excess filled larger gaps and could be sanded and scribed when dry. The kit supplies ball bearings to keep the nose down, but the new nose precludes using one, so I filled the nose with lead fishing sinkers held in place with epoxy. Now for the moment of truth. I spread epoxy on the mating surfaces for the nose and held it in place while the epoxy cured. To even out the misfit around the nose gear bay, I glued strips of 0.030-inch styrene butted against the resin part. Protecting the resin with tape, I contoured the styrene and feathered it into the fuselage. Gap-filling superglue, sanded smooth, evened out pits at the edges of the styrene. A couple of the clear parts sat slightly proud of the surface, so I carefully sanded them down and polished them back to clarity. The conversion set supplies pre-cut masks for the camera ports. I applied them with tweezers and burnished them onto the surface. A typical Tamiya kit, the rest of the Lightning went together quickly. With the rest of the airframe together, I still wasn't satisfied with the filled areas along the nose gear bay, so I applied a generous amount of Tamiya putty and spread it well past the margins of the styrene patches. I left it to dry for several days and smoothed the area with Goodman Model's hard Perspex sanders. The broad, solid backing ensured contours would remain consistent. In preparation for painting, I cleaned the surface of the model with 91% isopropyl alcohol on a cotton swab. I spread micro crystal clear along the attachment points for the windshield and rear section. Excess is easily removed with a slightly damp cotton swab. To ensure a snug fit, I taped the front of the windshield down as the glue dried. The center section, I used the closed option, didn't fit perfectly. It's possible the resin nose pushed the windscreen back a fraction of a millimeter. I gently sanded the front and rear edges until it slipped into place. It was a tight fit, so I worked carefully to not stress or crack the thin, clear parts. After applying the kit masks, I airbrushed the canopy with the interior color so that the frames matched the rest seen from outside. This layer revealed a slight step between the resin nose and the fuselage attached to the windshield. I protected the latter with tape and sanded the resin. Working through progressively finer grits restored the resin's smoothness. I filled minor gaps along the edges of the clear parts with Vallejo plastic putty. Water-based, this putty can be smoothed with a finger or damp cotton swab, eliminating sanding, so it's ideal for clear parts. To protect the detailed and painted gear bays, I used a combination of trimmed Tamiya tape and soft foam. I decanted gray Tamiya fine surface primer from a spray can and airbrushed the entire airframe. The primer did its job and revealed a few gaps and blemishes. I filled gaps at the leading edges with super glue. With the surface easier to see, I restored panel lines lost in assembly with a fine razor saw guided by tape. A fine drill bit and a pin vise cleaned up a pair of small holes in the leading edges just outboard of the engines. I filled gaps around the camera ports with Vallejo putty. To check my work, I reprimed the areas I'd filled and sanded. I wanted the surface smooth for the camouflage, so I went over the primer with a fine sanding pad to knock off any hair or grit that had gotten into the paint. Nothing beats good prep. Now it's time for camouflage. The first layer is the underside color. I used SMS RAAF Sky Blue Lacquer. When airbrushing undersurface colors, be sure to get it high enough on the sides for the scheme. And don't forget to paint the outside of the gear doors. I love how well lacquers cover without obscuring detail. I sanded the sky blue slightly with 1000 grit sandpaper, focusing especially at corners where paint vortices can leave a gritty or pebbly finish. Rubbing the sanded areas with a tack cloth removes fine paint powder that can cause problems later. One of the characteristics of the camo on this airplane was the wavy demarcation between the upper and lower colors. To mask this, I turned to decorative scissors, sometimes called pinking shears. Using one with a wave frequency that matched the scale, I cut Tamiya tape and applied it along the demarcation lines. The blade length limited the length of the strips I could cut, requiring long lines like those on the booms to be carefully aligned. I covered the underside of the wings and tail with more tape. Following the conversion set color guide, I applied SMS RAAF Earth over the upper surfaces, spraying lightly along the tape edges, minimizing paint buildup and helps seal the masks and prevent bleeding. I lightened the brown slightly with a little yellow and white and sprayed a thin coat inside panel lines. Photocopying Tamiya's painting guide at 1/48 scale, I marked out the camo pattern from the conversion instructions. In theory, X's mark the area remaining brown. I covered each of the drawings with heavy clear packing tape. This allows me to apply Tamiya tape over the marked drawings. Now I can cut carefully around the pattern, slicing the masking tape only. Each section can be gently peeled off the clear tape and placed in position on the model. For large areas, I cut just the outline on the drawing, placed it on the model, and filled the areas with more tape. For the final camo color, I airbrushed SMS Foliage Green. At least I thought it was the final layer, more on that later. I did add some post shading to this layer also. Peeling the masks from the top of the starboard wing shows how clean the demarcation lines are. The aircraft I was building apparently had a replacement leading edge on the starboard side. I carefully peeled the masks back from it underneath and masked around the panel lines on the bottom and top of the wing. Looking good so far. So the instructions call for the leading edge of, oh crap, on a stick. In the time it took me to get the tape off the model, the black lacquer crept under. Not only did it mark the paint, it actually ate into the plastic. Cleanup started with sanding the affected areas to remove the black paint and begin to smooth the surface. Obviously, I'll be repainting areas of the model. As it happens, research after the fact, led by a reader's remark online, indicated that the aircraft I was building may have been differently camouflaged. I mean, obviously, I wanted to paint the model twice, right? I started with the sky blue, being sure to cover all of the existing demarcation lines since the top colors would be repainted also. Then came the pinking shears and tape, masking, and more masking. This time, I replaced RAAF Earth with SMS US Olive Drab, lightening it with a light gray for a sun-faded and weathered finish. Looking at photos, it appeared that the break between the upper surface colors was slightly soft, so I masked them with worms of poster putty. The working theory is that these aircraft from ex-US AAF stock were refitted and repainted in Australia. The underside was completely repainted to obscure the large US Army titles that were likely there, but rather than completely repaint the upper surface, it appears that foliage green was sprayed in a disruptive pattern straight over the existing olive drab. This seems to be supported by the replacement wing leading edge, probably sourced from US stocks, with neutral gray underneath and fresh olive drab on top. Masking done, I applied foliage green. Spraying directly down over the edge of the poster putty produces a slightly soft edge. Peeling off the putty reveals the Lightning's unique camouflage. As much work as it was, I'm glad I had to repaint it. I masked and airbrushed the starboard wing leading edge with AK real color neutral gray underneath and straight SMS olive drab on top. In preparation for decals, I sprayed the model with Hataka clear gloss lacquer. I still had details to paint, including the wheels. I'd airbrushed the hub's aluminum earlier, so I placed a piece of tape across each assembled wheel and pressed it into the groove between the tire and the rim. Drawing the tip of a sharp #1 blade along the groove, it gently sliced through the tape, so I could carefully peel off the excess and leave a perfectly masked hub. I started by painting each tire Tamiya NATO black. Next, I airbrushed each side with Tamiya German gray, letting the shade feather into the black tread area. Finally, I airbrushed thin Tamiya buff along the edges of the tires. Peeling up the tape revealed beautifully masked wheels. To shine the oleo on the landing gear, I carefully drew around each one with a Molotow chrome marker. Decal time. The markings in the conversion set were thin, well-printed, and responded well to microscale microset before and microsol after they were in place. The tricky ones were the roundels on the starboard wing that crossed the panel line onto the replacement leading edge. Photos show them ending at that line. I applied tape along the panel line and positioned the roundel across the edge. After rolling and pressing the decal into place along the tape, I used a brand new and very sharp blade to slice the decal along the tape. Carefully pulling the tape off the wing removed the separated decal. It was a little jagged on the upper surface, but a little touch-up and weathering made that disappear. I sealed the decals with a couple of layers of Hataka clear gloss. To pop the recessed details, I flowed gray Tamiya panel line accent color into the sky blue areas. The upper camouflage and wheel wells got brown panel line accent color. Excess wash, both wet and dry, is easily removed with a little clean enamel thinner on a cotton swab. I sprayed the model with clear flat after the wash dried. Photos of the aircraft being modeled show heavy staining behind the supercharger exhaust on the booms. I started by spraying a thin mix of light gray and clear flat along the booms, feathering it farther back. References show the staining extended all the way to the vertical tails, so I lightly sprayed those. Next came a layer of red-brown mixed with light gray, sprayed in a narrow and shorter pattern in the center of the gray areas. Photos also reveal heavy oil or hydraulic stains streaked back from vents under the engines. I replicated them with dots of straight black and dark brown artist oil drawn back across the surface with turpenoid on a clean brush and smoothed with a cotton swab. AK Interactive weathering pencils are perfect for staining and fading the finish. Underneath, I outlined inspection hatches with streaking dirt. Applying a little water with a micro brush activated the pencils, softening and feathering the colors so it looked like grime left when the aircraft was serviced. The effect is constantly adjustable, so you can always add more pencil or more water. Underneath, I also added streaking by drawing a line with a pencil and blending the color back with a damp brush in the direction of airflow. To mimic a pattern of fading seen on photos of the aircraft, I outlined the center wing panels with buff. Then, using a damp, soft brush, I drew the lighter color toward the panel centers. To chip the paint around panels and along leading edges, I drew along them with a Prismacolor silver pencil. Skipping it and keeping the effect random adds realism. Once the gear was on, I needed to continue the oil staining under the engines to the gear doors. Artist oils did the trick. Finally, I removed the masks from the camera ports and called the model done. This was a really fun project, despite the fact that I made a big screw up and had to paint the model twice. I mean, it was a good showcase for RAAF camouflage. I'm really happy with the way the model looks, and it's a fine addition to my growing collection of Australian aircraft.